Money Dearest is the third episode of the fifth season of Cheers. This is directed, of course, by the wonderful James Burrows, and there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode in detail. I feel like it's been so long since we have a Cliff-based episode. In fact, I feel like it's been so long since we had an episode that didn't focus on Sam and Diane. Not complaining, because I love them, but I do love Cliff. And this is kind of a special episode because we meet Cliff's mother. And it's definitely a roller coaster as well. So as I said, there will be spoilers as I talk about various aspects of the episode. I don't think it's one of the funniest. I don't think I laughed out loud at any point, and I often do with Cheers. So for me, it's maybe not one of the most comedic, but at the same time, there was nothing wrong with it. I still thoroughly enjoyed it. And it actually starts off with Cliff coming into Cheers. He's just back from Canada. And then after the intro, we cut to Diane and Sam very briefly. We talk about their wedding or lack thereof, and this is really the only mention of it in this episode, but it is nice to establish where they currently are in the whole proposal situation. Diane left a silverware catalogue on the bar for Sam to look at. She's very happy. She's very happy talking about this wedding. She is still adamant that they are going to be getting married. And that's all we have for this episode. It's nice to have a little bit of information about that, but it's also nice to sidestep and focus on somebody else for a change. And we meet a new character called Duncan Fitzgerald, or Fitz. He's played by Richard Erdman, and we learn that he has been coming into Cheers for the last 2 weeks and buying drinks for everybody. He's very rich, and this is because he created or invented the metal vapor input valve that jet engines use. I googled it, it doesn't appear to be a thing, and that makes sense because obviously they would have to credit the real inventor if it was a thing, but this is how he gets his money, and Cliff gets an idea. He decides to invite his mother down to Cheers with the hope that she will fall in love with Fitz, Fitz will fall in love with her, they'll get married, and Cliff will have a very wealthy stepfather. And then we meet his mother, Esther Clavin, played by Frances Sternhagen. And she is not actually the most likeable character to begin with. She is a lot like Cliff, though. She does give us little-known facts, which is rather fun. And once Fitz and Mrs. Clavin started bonding over the war, I think her character became a lot more likeable. And things started to go really well. A week later, they're still together, and they come into Cheers, and they reveal something that I think probably none of us expected at this point, and that's the fact that she and Fitz are getting married tomorrow, apparently. And Cliff is obviously very excited about this. He starts to plan a lavish party, and then he finds out, and this I think was really, really great. He finds out that Fitz is actually donating the bulk of his money to charity. And this was actually his mother's idea, because she didn't want Fitz to get the wrong idea that she was just interested in him for his money. Now, to say to somebody, hey, donate your money to charity, all of your money, that's a bit of a bold thing to claim, because obviously she's not suggesting it for charity's purpose. And also to ask somebody to get rid of all of their money is a big thing. But I think at the same time, it is admirable that she is saying, I don't care about your money, I'm just interested in you. So on the other hand, I can see that the intentions were very good. Cliff doesn't see that. We get this really great moment where Sam confronts him and tells him he's being a jerk. He is being selfish because obviously Cliff is panicking that there's not going to be any money and his stepfather isn't going to be wealthy and he won't leave him anything. But as Sam reminds him, his mother is happy. What is interesting, though, is that at no point does anybody suggest that this is moving too quickly. They've been together a week and they're planning on getting married. And I feel like somebody should have said this is moving too quickly, but they don't. Instead, they plan a bachelor party, and this is in Cheers. Sam closes the bar early so they can have it there. And I was starting to think Diane's not really been in this very much. And then Carla and Mrs. Clavin come in, and apparently they'd actually ditched Diane by putting her in a taxi. Diane comes in, and in her usual obliviousness, she doesn't realise they did this on purpose. They then leave. Mrs. Clavin kind of indicates that she's going to do the same thing again with Diane, which is mean. I don't want to think of anybody being nasty to Diane. We kind of expect it from Carla, that's okay, but Mrs. Clavin has just met Diane. And the fact that she's already planning on ditching her by putting her in another taxi, I don't love that. She's not the most likeable character at this point. Nevertheless, off they go. The bachelor party is in full swing, despite Frasier's failed attempts at trying to tell a joke, and everything is going really well, high energy, and I think what happens next was really predictable. I could be wrong. I have seen the episode before, of course, but I just feel like it's something where we knew something was going to happen because everything was going so well, and then Fitz dies. And what we get after this is a really interesting scene. It cuts immediately from this high energy bachelor party to a much more somber scene in Cheers. The bar is completely empty and everybody there is mourning his loss. And what I think is particularly interesting about this is that everybody was around Fitz when he had the money. But as soon as he dies, it's just the main gang. Everybody else has disappeared. Maybe it was after hours. Maybe Cheers was closed at this point. I don't know. But I think it is possible that they made the conscious decision to only have a couple of people left in Cheers because Fitz was no longer there to open his wallet. And I think that is quite telling if that is what they were going for. And then we just have Cliff and his mother in a couple of minutes that are actually really sweet. And Cliff comforts his mother, encourages her to open up her emotions, and she begins to sob. And we do get a little bit of comedy in this with what Cliff says over the top of her sobbing, but in general it is a very moving scene. And she says that Cliff was her pride and joy, he was the best thing to ever happen to her. And then the closing words are from Mrs. Clavin, gee, think of that. With the thought there, of course, that Cliff was the best thing to have ever happened to her. That's not really a great sentiment. But of course, he seems like a great son, and in reality, that actually is a pretty great thing to have happened to her. So it's a really sweet episode. I love that we got a lot of focus on Cliff because I feel like we haven't had anything focusing on Cliff in so long. And it's definitely an emotional roller coaster. I rather enjoyed it. It's a nice little filler episode. It doesn't really contribute much to the overarching narrative we have through this season with Sam and Diane, which is a good thing. It's nice to take a step back from that every now and then. And it's a nice little self-contained story that wrapped itself up within one episode. Great to meet Mrs. Clavin. And ultimately, it's not a bad episode. Money Dearest is pretty enjoyable. Maybe not the funniest, but that being said, I can't fault it. It's still pretty great.